Hi, I'm Christianez, and I'm here going to talk about topics. One is about how to interview people to tell your story, which is arguably my most favorite thing to do. And the second is how to pitch to editors and make them care about your story, which is my least favorite thing to do and is like going to be the hardest part of the process of writing. So, when when we talk about how to interview people, what I want to talk about is how do we choose the right people to interview, how to reach out to them, and when you do get a hold of them, what questions to ask, and how to ethically use those quotes in your story. Now, which stories need interviews? Like, what topic that you're writing about need interviews? Every story is made better when we use the human element. So, if you are planning to write an article without interviewing people, I would really suggest against that because you could use data to try and explain things to people, but people really get it when you tell them a story, them care about someone or something. So, there are three types of interviews you could do. One is interviewing people to find out about their lived experiences. You could talk to experts and get their opinions, or you could talk to people and ask them about their recollections of something that another person told them. So, just like a hierarchy of evidence thing, lived experiences and expert opinions are kind of on the top. Um, we do prefer to get those. But if not, then you would hear a colleague mention, okay, this something someone told me, or I saw this happening to somebody's patient, and then you could also use those. So I'll just use a few of my stories to show you how I have used these interviews to make my stories better. This is one story I wrote that came out on the BMJ. It's about how Indian medical students are using social media to challenge the hierarchies present in medical education. So in this, I interviewed someone called Vignesh Dhananjayan. They are a trans non-binary doctor, and they are very active on X, talking about their experiences of being a queer person in medical education. So, in this interview, they talk about how medical education itself, in our textbooks, queer identities are not understood, they're misrepresented. In the next paragraph, they talk about how they were unable to get a gender neutral room in the men's hostel. Despite having paid hostel fees, they had to cohabit with men that they were not happy with. And then so how do you approach a person to get powerful stories? Let me illustrate using this example. I found out that um, this doctor was going through this issue because they posted on X about it. They talked about being thrown out of orthopedics OPD because they came with a earring, which was then considered, unprofessional, while for them it was something to affirm their gender expression. Then I kind of like um, reached out to them over social media. By that time, I did not actually have confirmation from any media house saying that they will publish the story. But it would be nice if you already have somebody who has agreed to pitch the story, because then when you write to the people, you could mention that. After I said that and told them that this will be on the record, I asked them whether they're okay with their identity being revealed, or how should I represent them. And once they agreed to all that, then we got on a call and I interviewed them. So what I'm trying to say here is, how do you find people with lived experiences? So you may have heard from friends, or you may have heard from on social media about people talking about something they went through which affected them, then you could reach out that way. The other thing that I do is put out social media calls for stories. Like I would say, I'm going to write about this. If anybody has lived experience, then please talk to me. I put that on my WhatsApp status, on X, and on stories, and people do reach out. And so when you approach them, the kind of information you have to give is about what your story is about and whether what media house has agreed to publish that. When you mention that some media house ka name, people are more likely to speak to you actually. And then always clarify that the conversation is on the record, so that if they say this particular part of this, I'm going to say it off the record, then you are ethically obligated to them to not use that. And if they request for anonymity, you must honor that. And lastly, and this is really important, when we talk to people from vulnerable communities, like people from the LGBTQIA community, for example, they are not, they are so used to being misrepresented. And if you're especially somebody who's not from the community, then they don't have any reason to trust you, to speak to you. So it's better to lead with um, whether you have some work that you have done on the community which has represented them well, then you can show them that. Or if you have people who can vouch for you, then you could lead with that. Or it's much better to reach out to community leaders in those communities, like people who are working with NGOs or people who they trust, and then ask them to refer you to people who would be willing to speak to them. Now the other thing is that people from vulnerable communities, when they share their stories with us, it's very, very important to represent that ethically. So before we go on to that, let's talk about what to ask. Now, a lot of times the interviews would be like, you got on the call, then you just tell them you don't know what more to ask for than the things that you had just thought about. Like, for example, if it was about, say, the same thing people feel in um, a heteronormative space such as in medical education, then you would, if you frame it like that, they're not going to be able to give you the details that you want. So it's just like how doctors do good history taking. So you just let them know what you're looking for in sense, just the general theme, and then just let them tell you their story. And when you talk about their story, you have to keep encouraging them to come out with more detail until you understand it in a way that it looks like it's played out in front of you as a scene. For example, I asked it in the OPD, how many patients had you already seen, who were the doctors around, and then exactly what did they say to you, those kind of things, so that it's easy for you to imagine. And then there is this other thing, when people talk and then you think they're done with their thought, this is a very valuable thing to do, where you just pause and wait for them to continue. Like 9 out of 10 times I have noticed with my sources that they actually do continue and they add more value to what they have already told you. And the other critical question you should ask is, how did that make you feel? Because if you see, in the last paragraph, Dhananjayan says, navigating the system as a queer medical student is extremely anxiety inducing. It's like there's a landmine waiting for me at every turn. And that is such a powerful statement, right? Like, when you say, how did that make you feel? People tend to really give you these brilliant, powerful quotes that you can then tie the whole thing together with. That's one. And the second thing is, even people who don't remember things very well, uh, end up remembering how they felt in that situation. So when you say, how did that make you feel? It's likely to jog their memory to bring out more details. So this is a question that I love asking all my sources, and it added a lot of value to the kind of interviews I was able to have with them. Next, how to write. Because it is a lived experience and it's their story, I try not to paraphrase when I write lived experiences. I try to record the conversation in some way after asking for consent. Like I either write down or I either record it. And then I try to use their words as much as possible. In case English is not their first language or they've given you a very convoluted long quote, then you can try paraphrasing. But like, please try to stay faithful to the original thing that they've said, and run the code by them before you file the story. This is something that like a lot of abroad journalists don't practice this, and that is in a way to say that, you have the cards, you don't lay them out on the table before people. But I like running the quotes with the people who have taken time to talk to me, because I don't want to get them in trouble. I don't want them to sound like something they're not comfortable with sounding like. It's my preferred thing to run the quotes by people before I file the story. Next is expert opinions. These are also brilliant ways to add value to your story. Now, this story came out on News Decoder, and this was about whether one should be able to buy pesticides online. Um, I'm not looking at the chat box, but I see that there are a few messages. I request Parth and Radhika to kind of keep a track and let me know if there's something I need to address eventually. So anyway, this story is about whether you can buy pesticides online. So now India has given an order which has made online sales of pesticides legal. Um, on and That I think happened in 2023 or so. But then after that, what had happened is doctors started coming on X and started saying that, people are buying it online and using it for deliberate selling, to which they should not have any access to. So then is when I decided to write this story. So who did I interview? I interviewed somebody working with Center for Pesticide Suicide Prevention, Professor Michael Edelston. I interviewed Gamini Manuvira, who was the previous registrar for pesticides of the country of Sri Lanka. I interviewed a agronomy professor called Chinnaswamy. He's from TNAU, Tamil Nadu Agricultural University. I interviewed a pesticide shop owner and a few doctors. Now, these are all various diverse stakeholders from who have looked at this issue from various ways, right? And so let's talk about how to approach experts for interviewing. Now, this is a little difficult, but so Edelston, I found him when I was looking online about people who are doing work against pesticide suicides. And then I noticed that there is a Center for Pesticide Suicide Prevention, which is located with affiliated with University of Edinburgh. So I wrote an email to Edelston and requested that I would interview them. So before I do that, it's quite important to mention what work of theirs that you have engaged with that has made you reach out to them. It's likelier that they will reply back to you if they, know that you have read their work. Secondly, and then see who are the authors who have done that work. And sometimes these articles also have emails for these authors where you could quote their study, and then you could ask them, I would like to speak to you about this work that you have done, which is also a great way to reach out to experts. And so the best way to reach out is via email, mentioning again to lend credibility, please mention each story, or you could also attach your CV with your previously linked stories in order to increase the likelihood that they speak to you. Then, the last thing that I would like you to remember is that when you write to experts who are working for organizations, for example, recent story on snakebite, I 2 months to reply back to me. And in the meantime, they wanted my CV. They wanted to look at all my previously published work. Then they wanted me to officially frame questions. And then they also answered it in an official capacity. It's a little bit of a difficult process to get to people who are working with government organizations or any organizational affiliation. But these people tend to agree to talk to you if you don't mention those organizational affiliations as an option. So, what do you ask these experts? Like, firstly, you when you go to talk to them, it's very imperative that you do a little bit of research on their background and on what work they do. And then you could ask them relevant story related questions that you pesticide shop owner was a great expert in her field. So I asked her, if somebody came to your shop and then you're not sure whether they are a farmer, how would you sell this pesticide? And she gave me a lot of value. She said that we would look at them. We actually know all the farming community around the local area. So if it is somebody we don't know, then we do a lot of background check. We tell them, come with your parents or come with your relative to get things like that. So that made me realize that offline sales actually had a lot of unofficial regulation, which has been removed by online sales. So that was a value add in that conversation. So um, it's important to be more curious about how they do things. Um, they may not answer you directly, but they might just explain their process, which would add value. Any new directions that the work is taking that they're excited about. It's very nice to talk to experts, especially when they are passionate about their field, to ask them, what are you excited about? They really do give you a lot of things to think about. And then designation, whether their organization name can or cannot be mentioned, because, like, I mean, we're not here to get people into trouble unnecessarily. And then this is the most important question that you must ask any expert: who else should I speak? That is the thing, because I spoke to Edelston and then he connected me to Manuira. He connected me to so many people, some other person in Philippines who was looking at the same thing. And it was like, and similarly, anytime I interview an expert and I ask this question, I've always been led to their brilliant network of people who will then give you more value. So always, whoever you interview, I want your last question to be, who else should I speak to? And another way of asking the same question is, who in your field agrees with you and who in your field disagrees with you? Because we want balanced perspectives. You have to also talk to people who disagree with things, and they also kind of like, I mean, your story, for example, what Nandita asked, like, how do we critique doctors without them getting defensive? The answer to that is balancing out your perspective. You don't just go on, condemning them. You also try to look at what it is in the system that's making them do this. Like, so that will balance out your perspective, and that will stop making it look like an opinion, which is subjective, and make it look more like a reported piece, which is objective. People will tend to trust more if think you're being more objective. Now, establish them as experts earlier in the story before quoting them. For example, I could say Path Sharma said this. Then somebody might ask me, why should I follow what Path Sharma says? Right. So if I instead write, Path Sharma has this many papers on this particular topic and he's been working on this for about, then people are more likely to actually care about what they say. So, for example, when I write about Manuvira, I had to mention that he was the past registrar for pesticides in Sri Lanka. They've been working on pesticide regulation for decades in that country, and Sri Lanka is quite a similar country to India in terms of agriculture and pesticide use. And so, what they say will have value and will apply to India, and we have to establish that earlier on in the story. And where possible, please quote their work or study that they've done and the significant findings. And again, here also direct quotes are best, but it's you can paraphrase more. Like I don't really adhere to very strict standards of using direct quotes when it comes to expert opinions. And then, yeah, third person recollections. And as doctors and public health professionals, this is something that you would come across quite often. But how to use it ethically is something we have to see. Like, if this is an article I wrote for Behan Box, it's about how fertility preferences are killing women in India. So, something that a lot of health professionals know HB of 4 and 3 get pregnant, and their families expect them to get pregnant and then, give birth. And even if it affects their health adversely, all of that we know.
Christianez, your voice is breaking.
But
Can you maybe turn off your camera and then, because the last thing you said it was not clear. If you could repeat that once. Thanks.
yeah, just a minute, please. Okay. So what I was saying was that, as health professionals, there are just some things that we know of, but are not quantified. Like, for example, this particular thing that I had written about was how women who are sick and are in no shape to actually get pregnant or carry out a pregnancy, still are expected by families to, have children, especially if they have not had a boy. So, this is something that a lot of us have seen and know, but we have not quantified. And let's look at this paragraph, for example, where I have quoted a general medicine consultant from Hyderabad saying that most of the time the women themselves want to have a child despite the threat to their lives. I remember a patient crying to me saying, if I do not have a child, I will either be abandoned by my husband or he will bring home a woman. And I feel that trying for a baby and dying is better than either of those options. Now, I have not interviewed this patient, so it's not a lived experience. And I would not call Dr. Kaki expert in this. This is just something that they are recollecting that somebody else had said. So this is this third type of interview where you are using this third person recollection. So you could do that, because ideally what I would have done if it was possible was ask Dr. Kaki to connect me to the patient and then directly interview them after, of course, asking for their consent and such things. But sometimes it's not possible. Physicians or like public health workers, they don't have these contacts of people that they've seen, so you might have to just do with this third person recollection. But if you do that, how do you typically represent it? First, you must always try to reach the patient or whoever is involved. But if that's not possible, you remove all identifiers. You don't use direct quotes. You have to paraphrase the story. And if the patient or the person who is referred to reads it, they should not be able to identify themselves in that story. So you have to leave out a lot of details that would, identify the person. Like, if that person reads your story, they should not say that this is me who is being quoted. So in that way, you could sort of ethically use this as well. And so this is something that I just have opposing views or perspectives. What do I do? Like, I love it when this happens, because it means that you are having diverse perspectives. This is going to likely balance out your story quite a bit. And if not as well, it will also give you more story ideas. For example, I had recently written about insulin, how insulin production in the US is reducing, and they're moving more towards making GLP-1 agonists because they want to make more profits. And I was just talking about how this might affect countries like India. Um, and I thought my story was quite nice, but an endocrinologist eventually reached out and told me, you know what, I don't think that the way you mentioned it, that is how it's going to play out. I think India has the infrastructure, the pharmaceutical infrastructure to make our own insulin. We're not going to depend on the US. And if US stops giving us insulin, we will, make do. And instead of thinking, okay, maybe it was wrong of me to write that story or whatever, all I realized was this is going to be my second story pitch where I could talk about US stopping manufacturing of insulin, or US moving away from manufacturing insulin, and how India might rise to the crisis. So, opposing views and perspectives are going to really enrich your story rather than take away from it. So, the benefits of interviewing people is diverse perspectives, your story grows and becomes more balanced. You may come across more story ideas on the same topic, which is very, very important. The 2 months ago, when India planned to make snake bite a notifiable disease and they introduced the NAPC, I pursued that. I talked to so many people that at this point I've written 4 stories on it with material enough for 4 to 5 more stories. So um so the once you hold on to a topic and you pursue it and you talk to more people, it's definitely going to grow and become more than what you had initially intended it to be. Next, you would grow a network of people you can contact for opinions on other stories as well. Like, especially a few people who are very candid and forthcoming and are experts on topics. You can make them your regular sources. You could just say, always reach out to them. And it's worth maintaining good relationships and running quotes by them for this reason. Like, having a good network of people who know they can trust you and could are willing to speak to you. And these people might tip you on more developments on the topic later, which is like, after I started reporting on snakebite, one of my sources recently texted me saying, hey, there's this new app that they have launched called SURP that, for reporting snakebite data. Do you think you want to look at it? And that's really exciting, right? Like, once you become established as the person for talking about this issue, then people will reach out to you and say, this new thing has happened, do you want to cover that? Which is also like really nice.